Hi, this is George Origins. When you think about the most recognizable marks on the planet, it's easy to forget that each one began as a guess, a sketch on tracing paper, a hunch under deadline, a choice that didn't feel historic at the time. The Nike Swoosh, Apple's Bitten Apple, and Starbucks' Green Siren look inevitable now, but their beginnings were anything but. They came out of cramped rooms and quick decisions, sharpened by years of iteration and myth-making. If you're willing to look past the gloss, you'll find very human origin stories, half chance, half craft, that turned simple shapes into global signals. Start with Nike. Picture a small, no-frills conference room in Oregon in 1971. A young graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson lays out tissue paper sketches for Phil Knight, co-founder of a scrappy athletic brand that's racing to meet a factory deadline. The brief is loose, something that moves, something that feels fast, and the options range from circles to stripes. Knight doesn't fall in love. He picks a mark more reluctantly than triumphantly and says words that have since become legend. "I don't love it, but it will grow on me." That handmade stroke, the swoosh, ships to the factory essentially as drawn because the clock demands it. There is no grand committee, no months-long debate, just a deadline and a bet. In hindsight, Nike's own archives describe exactly that. Fast feedback, a short turnaround, and a founder's hesitant approval before the sketch flew off to Guadalajara so production could begin. Because the internet loves a tidy parable, you'll often hear the story reduced to the $35 logo. True, Davidson was paid $35 for the assignment, but that's not the whole story. Years later, Nike brought her back for a surprise celebration, presented her with a gold swoosh ring, and gave her shares in the company. Reuters has tracked that gift through interviews and archival video, noting that Phil Knight later referenced 500 shares at a shareholders' meeting, shares that would be worth very real money after multiple stock splits. So yes, the swoosh began as a student gig under a looming deadline, but the folklore misses the second act, where gratitude caught up with history.
The magic of the swoosh isn't a secret code. It's how the curve behaves. Flip it, shrink it, print it in a single ink on a sweaty mesh jersey, it still reads as speed and momentum. What looked like a shrug in the room became an accelerant in the world. That's one lesson from Nike's mark. Taste can follow exposure. Ship a bold, reproducible idea, and the world may do the polishing for you. Now jump to California a few years later. Apple's first logo was not the clean silhouette you know. In 1976, co-founder Ronald Wayne drew an ornate illustration of Isaac Newton reading beneath an apple tree. It was charming and totally unworkable at small sizes on early hardware. Apple needed something simple enough to stamp on plastic and unforgettable enough to stand for a new kind of machine on a crowded trade show floor. In 1977, the brief moved to ad agency Regis McKenna, where designer Rob Yanoff delivered a radically reductive idea: a single apple shape with a bite taken out, striped with horizontal bands of color. The bite wasn't biblical, and it wasn't a programmer's pun. Yanoff has said repeatedly that the bite was for scale, to keep the mark from reading as a cherry, and the rainbow stripes were a visual way to telegraph a killer feature of the Apple II, color graphics, right inside the logo. That clarity helped sell a complicated revolution as something friendly and human, and the mark was approved and launched with astonishing speed. If you've heard that the logo is a tribute to Alan Turing, consider this your myth-busting moment. It's a beautiful story, but an urban legend. Snopes and multiple interviews with Yanoff have knocked it down. The famous bite solves a visual problem first and foremost, and any bite wordplay was a happy coincidence noticed after the fact. The power here isn't in a hidden narrative. It's in a silhouette so strong, It can survive any finish Apple throws at it. Over the years, Apple shifted the surface treatment from rainbow to monochrome to chrome, then back to flatter treatments, yet the outline held like a tuning fork. Even 2 decades ago, outlets were already documenting an official move to sleeker metallic executions. Trends changed, the shape didn't. That's how you give a logo a long life, without making it a museum piece. And then there's Starbucks, whose logo story starts not with coffee foam, but with sea spray. In 1971, the founders wanted an identity rooted in Seattle's maritime soul and the seafaring history of the coffee trade. Designer Terry Heckler went hunting through old marine books until a twin-tailed mermaid, a siren, stared back at him from the page. It was irresistible, mythic, a little mischievous, and undeniably memorable. The first mark, printed in brown, read Starbucks Coffee, Tea, and Spices, and the siren was full-length, woodcut style, more historical emblem than modern logo. As the business changed hands and ambitions expanded, the siren evolved. In 1987, after Il Giornale acquired Starbucks, Heckler merged the visual languages, shifting the palette to green and modernizing the illustration. In 1992, the company cropped the mark tighter, zooming into the siren's face to create a bolder, more brandable circle. And by 2011, the word Starbucks disappeared from the ring entirely. The symbol was strong enough to stand alone, globally recognizable without a single letter. Starbucks' own archive summarizes this evolution in a neat arc. Brown to green, full figure to close-up, word mark to pure icon.
If you're wondering what the siren means, Starbucks has supplied its own poetry over the years, a metaphor for the siren song of coffee that lures us cupside. Captivating, ritualistic, a promise you return to again and again. As a piece of brand strategy, it's smart. The symbol doesn't try to literalize beans or cups. Instead, it chooses allure, the feeling of being pulled in from the cold coast to something warm. That's an insight you can't fake with trend-driven graphics. It comes from thinking about the ritual, not just the product. Put these origin stories side by side and a pattern emerges. First, small rooms beat big committees. The swoosh wasn't born from 100 rounds of refinement. It was a bold line sent to a factory because the trucks were leaving. Apple's bite was a designer solution to a clarity problem, not a months-long symbolism exercise. Even Starbucks' siren, though rooted in old books, was a fast, decisive choice made by a tiny team chasing a feeling. The lesson for any brand: constraints are fuel. Give a clear problem to a talented person on a real deadline, and you're far more likely to get an idea with edges. Second, myths rush in when brands don't tell their own stories. $35 and nothing more. A secret tribute to touring. These are tidy, shareable narratives that flatten nuance. When companies publish their own archives and designers speak plainly about their choices, the record improves. Nike's Department of Nike Archives reframed the swoosh not as a lucky doodle, but as a rough, urgent idea that grew on its founder and then on the world. Rob Janoff has spent years patiently explaining that the Apple bite solves recognition, apple, not cherry, and that the stripes were a wink to color. Starbucks documents its own evolution step by step so the internet doesn't have to guess. Owning your history is part of owning your brand. Third, simplicity isn't a compromise, it's a platform. A simple mark can change finish, color, or context without losing itself. That's why the swoosh works burned into suede, embroidered on mesh, or blown up on a stadium screen. It's why Apple can move from rainbow to chrome to flat, while the silhouette still rings out from across a room. It's why Starbucks can drop its own name and keep the siren, trusting the face to carry the brand in any language. A good logo survives fashion because it isn't fashion, it's form. Finally, there's a human truth running through all three. Iconic design often starts as a leap of faith. Phil Knight didn't love the swoosh at first, he shipped it anyway. Steve Jobs didn't ask for an allegory, he chose a shape people could understand at a glance. The Starbucks founders didn't focus group the siren into existence. They trusted a symbol with texture and history. These aren't stories about uncovering a perfect idea. They're stories about choosing a strong one and then letting time, consistency, and product experience do the compounding. So the next time you spot these marks out in the wild, on a runner's heel, on the lid of a laptop in a cafe, on a cup warming someone's hands, remember where they came from. A student sketch that caught a plane to a factory because the door was closing. A bite added so a fruit wouldn't look like a cherry. And a few rainbow stripes hinting at the first burst of color on a home computer. A siren lifted from a dusty book and recast in the colors of a new ambition. The stories behind the logos aren't tidy because creativity rarely is, but that's exactly why these shapes feel alive. They weren't carved by committee. They were chosen by people who had something to prove, and then proven over decades by millions of small, consistent uses in the real world. If you're building a brand today, take the right lesson from these icons. Pick a mark with a clear idea you can reproduce anywhere. Tell the true story early so myths don't tell it for you. And keep the silhouette sacred even as you play with the surface. Do that long enough, and one day your logo will stop being a graphic and start being shorthand. For motion, for possibility, for the promise of a cup you'll come back to tomorrow.